Hi, this is Jack from Platinum Star Games. I'm one of the co-owners, and I'm going to be deck teching my Rashmi EDH deck today. I've made this as a competitive EDH deck, so it is quite a strong deck. It is meant for 4 players over a 1v1 strategy, so I will discuss some of my choices based on that decision. So let's start with just discussing Rashmi's ability, in case you don't know. Whenever you cast the first spell each turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell's, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you don't, cast the revealed spell, put it into your hand. So, what I like to do in this deck is to be able to have cheap interaction on everyone else's turn, to be able to maximize the value that I'm getting out of Rashmi. So, as you'll see, I'll have a lot of sorceries that are valuable on my turn, or creatures that have good effects on my turn, and a lot of cheap interaction for my opponent's turn. So I broke down the deck into different categories, so we will start with the mana rocks. So first is Mox Diamond, very strong. These are the 0 mana artifacts that are all very strong in this kind of strategy. So Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, we've got Chrome Mox, which is only online if you have 3 or more artifacts. Or no, that's Mox Opal, I messed that up. And Chrome Mox, you have to exile a card from your hand, which you usually have plenty of cards. Mana Crypt is a good option for any deck that has 2 colorless in their commander cost, as it lets you ramp it out extremely quickly. We've got Birds of Paradise. Birds of Paradise is just a fantastic 1-drop green accelerant. It's just good fixing, and I'd put it in the same vein, even though I've cut most of the other mana rocks or mana dorks because they're just more restrictive. You can't get blue or green, and blue is obviously an important color in this combination. So we have Mana Vault. Mana Vault and moving forward, a few other ones are very important as they tap for multiple colorless mana, which we will get into why that's important later. But Mana Vault and Soul Ring, both in the same vein, are very strong mana accelerants, so they're boom in the deck. Here's one that's my decision that I don't see a lot of. Magus of the Library is tap 1, add a colorless to your mana pool, or tap to draw a card only if you have 7 cards in hand. So it's like Library at, what is it, Pendulum Vale? No, that's not it. Library of Alexandria. It is a very strong card in control matchups where you are trying to fight against the card advantage of your opponent's hand, and being able to just have a 2 mana thing that's either a mana dork or a draw engine is just super good. Simic Signet is a mana rock that's included in this deck because it's great. It taps for colors, it's 2 mana, helps you accelerate into Rashmi on turn 3. It's just an all-rounder. Felwar Stone on that same note. Thought Vessel is great because you're often just getting so much value from Rashmi if you can get it that your hand is going to get huge. Being able to prevent yourself from discarding is just a great effect. Basalt Monolith is in the same thing. It's taps for 3 colorless, which is a very important part of this deck. I do not have Power Artifact or Rings of Brighton Hearth in this deck, partially because they're very expensive cards, but I think this card alone just merits a spot in the deck without them. I don't think you have to go all in. Now the next package that I have is my draw engines, and just like one-time use draw stuff. So first up is Brainstorm. Brainstorm's just a great card when you have fetch lands, ways to just get rid of, manipulate the top of the deck in certain ways, which I do have a fair amount in this deck. It's an instant, so you cast it on your opponent's turn, you get a card. It's just an all-around great card. Peak is another one. It's kept its place over different cantrips that have been in the deck over time, mostly because of the fact that it's instant. I would love to keep Gataxian Probe, but the fact that its sorcery speed really does limit it, and I like having these effects as instant. As you'll see, I think there's only 1 sorcery speed cantrip left in the deck, and that's just because it's great, and I'll explain why. Next we have Opt. Opt is just another instant speed one, scry one, great effect, draw a card, great. Ponder as the only instant speed cantrip left, just because you can shuffle away the top 3, which is another shuffle effect in this deck. Since you've got so much information, knowing the top of your deck is great to just poof it away. Next, we have Sylvan Library. So these are very valuable enchantments that are coming up next. Sylvan Library being one of the strongest draw engines in Commander, I believe. You have so much life to work with that the 4 life that you're paying to draw an extra card really doesn't matter in the end. And how fast this card can get you ahead is insane sometimes when you're just drawing 3 cards a turn and you can just counter anything that your opponent's throwing out. It's fantastic. Rhystic Study, often will you just draw you, in a 4-player game, will just draw you a lot of cards. A lot of people know to play around it and will just pay the extra mana, but when you can get them and you can get the cards, it can be a lot over time. And at 3 mana at a sorcery speed, again, one of the things I kind of need to do on my turn, gives me something to cast the first spell for Rashmi. It's great. Mystic Remora, same vein as Rhystic Study, but it is much harder for your opponents to pay for this. But you have to time it a little bit better. If you're playing with people that you know are going to jam some mana rocks early on, you want to jam Mystic Remora turn 1 if possible. If you're playing more of a mid-range game, you play it later on to hopefully get some value later on then. Search for Azcanta is the newest of the permanent value cards that are in this deck. I've really been liking this as just another card selection option, but then once it flips, it really gives you a lot of options. So I will flip it in case those don't know. You look at the top 4 cards and you reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put them in your hand, put the rest on the bottom in any order. So that just gives you a repeatable way to get more interaction through your deck. And as you'll see, I have a lot of interaction in this deck, so it's important to keep all your counter spells and whatnot up. And the fact that you can do this end of turn to just get some value out of mana that you kept up for counter spells, it's great. Treasure Cruise is a big draw spell, so it's kept its place just because draw 3 is fantastic, and having an 8 mana thing will sometimes just get big cards for Rashmi. You can get a lot of value. Whatever you essentially Rashmi into, you get to play, which sometimes you just want to keep the card when it's a counter spell, but when it's just another piece of accelerant or a piece of value, it's great on that. Dig Through Time is another way to just get through for like combo pieces or more interaction. It's another one of those that will hit pretty much all the time for Rashmi. Next package, we have All My Interactions. So first is all the counter spells in the deck, and of course we start with the champion, Force of Will. Free counter spell is just great all the time. You can do whatever you really need to with your mana, and then know that you have a backup plan in case that you need to counter something critical that will win your opponents the game. So Force of Will, we got Pact Negation, and then even Misdirection I found has been useful in my meta. Just being able it's great in counter wars. It's great if someone tries to target Rashmi early on and you want to like mess up their removal spells. It's just, I really like this card. It's just another powerful free interaction spell. Now we have cheap spells. We have Swan Song, I think, is one of my favorite. Just being able to catch tricky enchantments along with instants and sorceries is just the bird doesn't really usually matter, and having a 1 mana piece of interaction is just great. Flusterstorm is great against Storm. The fact that it only counters instant or sorcery spell is a little limiting, but the fact that that's usually where the fights in competitive EDH happen, it tends to be really good for those purposes. Mental Misstep, I guess that's technically another free piece of interaction, but being able to counter a Soul Ring or an early Mystic Remora can really stop your opponents from getting way ahead and unmanageable. And just having this, even before you've played your turn, your first land for turn, stopping someone's turn 1 play is great. Dispel is just there for counter wars. It's another one piece of mana piece of interaction. There's a lot of instance counter spells, whatever you need to Cyclonic Rift that you need to answer. That it's just a good card. Stifle. I've included Stifle type effects in my deck. Not really for like the tempo advantage of like countering their fetch land, although that sometimes is the case. It's mostly just a kind of catch-all. If someone happens to have some way to get something into play that you can't interact with, like if they have a Beseiju or Vexing Husher, I think is one that, so you can't counter something and they get an activated ability into play that's really troubling, you can stifle it, and it just answers things that are hard to deal with sometimes. A Null is great. It functions mostly like another Nature's Claim in the deck, which I do have. We will see that. It's mostly for things that you really don't want to let resolve. Paradox Engine, stuff that they can kind of, if it resolves, go off in response. So a Null is just a really safe answer for any problem artifact or enchantment. Mana Drain is, there's not much to say about Mana Drain. It's a strong card. The fact that it's a 2-mana counterspell, so it's just counterspell on top of a mana generation effect. This card is insane. Snapcaster Mage is another one of those insane cards that's just, you can buy back any piece of interaction in the deck. That's another one that's just, it speaks its value in its own, like, you can't get better than them. Counterspell is just a staple. 2-mana counterspell is a great value. No restrictions. Arcane Denial is another unrestricted counterspell that I really like. Only costs 1 blue, so in the off chance that you only have that 1 blue up, and or you need to conserve your blue mana because that you know you're going to have to counter multiple things in the turn, Arcane Denial is just fantastic. It's often a good political counterspell because it doesn't really draw much hate, because they get some value back, you get value, it's just everybody's happy. Negate is another one of those kind of mostly for counter wars, but it can catch planeswalkers, it can catch board wipes, it can catch a lot of different things. That I love this. It's another 1 in blue counterspell, so it lets you effectively out blue your opponent. Muddle Mixture is another restricted one, but it's kept in here because of the transmute. The transmute for 2 is really strong. I'll go through the end and see if what exactly is the tutors, but I mean, it's just mana rocks. If you really need the extra mana rock, it's another unrestricted counter spell. It's just very, very powerful to have that extra tutor effect on the counter spell. You've got Trick Bind. I will always include Trick Bind in my deck because I was playing Brog at one time, and this was the only possible card that could have stopped me. I had, I think, 3 to 4 counter spells. I had the ability to flicker Brago and win on the stack, and this was the only card in Magic's history that could have stopped me. So thus it has earned its spot in most of my blue control decks. It's being able to split second stop any triggered or activated ability and just stop that for the whole turn is just great. Disdainful Stroke is a less powerful counterspell, but still really good because it catches bigger bomb stuff. My meta is a little bit on the bigger side, so I tend to catch higher costing commanders or like big, like an ad nauseum. There's a lot of things that are just good to catch with Disdainful Stroke. It's another 1 in a blue counter spell, so it's good for counter wars. We have Disallow as the third stifle type effect, and this is just another good catch-all type card. It just catches any spell, any activated ability, or any triggered ability, so it's good in any situation. Cryptic Command is another one of those counter spells that's just it's a lot of value. The fact that there's 4 different modes. Usually you're using it to counter and draw, but you can use it to bounce a problem permanent or tap your opponents down so you're not dying to their aggro. There's a lot of uses for this card, and it should be included in any blue deck, I think, at least a control deck. Cyclonic Rift, that's another one that kind of speaks on its own. It handles everything. There's not much that can withstand a Cyclonic Rift. Gets past Hexproof, Indestructible, gets around graveyard strategies a lot of the time, and someone cheated something into play, it's back in their hand along with all their mana rocks, and it's just usually a devastating card. Reality Shift is in here as a solid creature removal because the deck is a little weak once if a creature resolves. It's an exile effect, which is a powerful way to deal with creatures. And the Manifest actually becomes relevant in a endgame combo that I will discuss later once I get to the Recursion section. So, Beast Within, also another way to deal with any target permanent, also factors into the Reality Shift endgame combo that I will mention later. Nature's Claim is just a 1 green mana, remove target artifact or enchantment. Ways to have, I love just having the cheap ways to interact with my opponent in this deck, and it's another cheap way to just deal with any problem permanent. Crows and Grip Split Second, again, is just fantastic. Being able to do something and your opponent can't even interact with it is just very powerful. Now we have my tutors. So starting with the creature tutors, I have Trophy Mage. Trophy Mage mostly gets me either Basalt Monolith, Oblivion Stone, or Tangle Wire are the main targets for that. So it's either to board wipe to slow the game down, or Basalt Monolith is another one of the single pieces that lets me win in the end. So that just gives me a lot of good options throughout the game. Trinket Mage is another one, usually just Trinket Mage for Soul Ring, but Trinket Mage for Voltaic Key or for Sensei's Divining Top. There's a lot of really good options. Mana Vault, Mana Crypt. The Spellseeker is a really great card to get any piece of interaction. It gets me the endgame combo pieces. There's either Dramatic Reversal or Sprouting Swarm. There's all the sorts of counter spells that it gets. It's great. I love this card. Mystical Tutor, same deal, except there's no restriction on the mana cost, so you don't get it in your hand, but you get it to the top of the deck. So there's a few other things that you can get that, like you can get a Cryptic or you can get a Disallow, but it's just another tutor for an instant. This is a blue instant, so mostly for counters, Dramatic Reversal, same deal. We have Tezzeret the Seeker, is just a powerful way to use my mana on my turn and then untap some artifacts and leave some interaction up, but it also has the -X where you can get any artifact from your deck, and as you'll see, like the artifact pieces that I have, that combo are very strong, so this gets just about all of them. Fabricate, same thing, it gets an artifact to your hand, gets any artifacts, so it gets a lot of stuff for the combo pieces. Reshape, you do have to sacrifice an artifact for this one, but the fact that it gets it into play is just it's just another strong one. Warfare Invention is probably the best one because it's instant. You don't have to sacrifice something, and it just puts it right into play. So Warfare Invention is probably the best card to see in this deck. Sometimes it just gets anything you need. So now we're moving into the combo pieces, and I'm going to start with Blue Sun Zenith because that is the main way the deck wins, is by generating infinite mana and Blue Sun Zenithing all of your opponents, where you can just Blue Sun, shuffle it back in your deck, use a cantrip to draw it back, Blue Sun another opponent, shuffle it back in, cantrip, kill another opponent. So that's the way that the deck usually tends to win. And going off in that way, I'll start talking about Sensei's Divining Top as just a great piece of top deck manipulation. As you see, Voltaic Key, if you don't know this combo, you tap to put this back on the top of your deck, but because it's not part of the cost, you can also untap it with Voltaic Key and do it again, so it goes back on, trying to do it again, but it's not there. So you essentially draw this and then another card. So it's a very effective draw engine with just these two. They're both 1 mana artifacts, so they're both searchable with Trinket Mage. Voltaic Key just being a very powerful way to untap like Mana Vault or Mana Crypt, generate a lot of artifacts. Both these cards are really, really good in this deck. Paradox Engine also to speak with them. The little interaction that I spoke of, if you have Paradox Engine out, and a way of generating more than, I think, is it 3 mana, then you can just continuously flicker that to the top, redraw top, untap, replay top, untap all your artifacts, and just go off from there. You're drawing infinite cards, generating infinite mana. It's a very strong combination in this deck. And then there's, continuing on with Paradox Engine, there's Sprouting Swarm. So Sprouting Swarm has Convoke and Buyback, and you put a 1/1 sapling into play. It's a simple effect. Can be used just to kind of stall out some, like a big block in the mid game if you really need to. But once you get going and you have Paradox Engine out, you can cast this, Convoke it, buy it back, make a 1/1, and then once you have enough creatures, you can just convoke your whole board, buy back for 5. So as long as you have 5 creatures, you can convoke, buy back, and cast this unlimited amount of times, generating continuously larger amounts of creatures and untapping all your artifacts. And it's another way to just generate infinite mana and infinite creatures too. It's a strong combo in this deck. And then the last one is Ice-Crown Scepter and Dramatic Reversal, which also works with Ice-Crown Scepter and any like cantrip spell. But just usually this with any way to generate 3 or more colorless mana gets you infinite mana, and you just that's why the mana rocks like Basalt Monolith and Mana Vault are really important in this deck. Staff of Nomination is the lead-in to the kind of minor stacks, and it's the last piece of the combo that I tend to use. Staff of Nomination lets you kind of tap some opponent's creatures in the mid-game, lets you draw some cards, lets you gain some life, although that's usually not relevant. I have had it save me in a few times before, just that 1 or 2 extra life. But then the fact that you can, with infinite mana, draw a card, pay 1, untap, and draw your whole deck is just a very strong way to use your infinite mana. It's a 3 mana artifact, so it's tutorable with Trophy Mage. And it is just one of the ways I usually tend to go off with my infinite mana once I get there. Tangle Wire is another newer inclusion in the deck. It's mostly there to just slow down the pace of the game and let me get to a point where I can have enough mana to answer what my opponents need to do. It is recurable with some of the stuff in my decks, so the fact that I can bring it back and keep tapping them down is relevant, but it's just there to stall, really. It's just one of those cards that's not as powerful, but it's got a job. Oblivion Stone is there as the one board wipe in the deck besides Cyclonic Rift. I found that I just needed some way to deal with the aggressive strategies in my meta, and Oblivion Stone is often just a good, like, ramping into this is usually just the best way to deal with like a token strategy or something like that. And then again, it's also a 3 mana artifact, so it's tutorable with Trophy Mage. We've got Meekstone as a way to slow down bigger attackers, so like just anything that's gonna threaten me. I really don't plan on attacking, so the untap doesn't really affect me. The only creature that I have that really needs to tap is Birds of Paradise, and that's obviously not affected by that. So now we get into the recursion part of the deck, and I guess I should talk about the Seasons Past combo. So in case someone deals with Blue Sun Zenith by like exiling it, I do have an extra way of winning, which involves Season Past. It also requires me to draw my whole deck, but it's Seasons Past and Beast Within a land if they don't have a creature, or just Reality Shift their creature and Seasons Past and a cantrip, and you just cycle all 3, and eventually you will just exile their whole deck. They'll have a bunch of you just keep going through their manifested creature, exiling it over and over again, and recurring both the spell, all 3 of the spells with a cantrip and Seasons Past. Noxious Revival is a really good way of ensuring what I'm getting from the Rashmi trigger and putting it on the top of my deck, whatever I need from the graveyard. Another good trick that I didn't mention with Sensei's Divining Top is tapping it in response to the Rashmi trigger and putting top back on the deck, thus guaranteeing you usually that you just put top right back with the Rashmi trigger, and that your opponent doesn't know as much information as they really should. So it's just a nice little way to conserve the information that they would usually learn from Rashmi and still get value from it. Eternal Witness is just another powerful way to recur whatever kind of thing that you need. I did have a Tooth and Nail package in this deck before with Peregrine Drake and Deadeye Navigator, where this worked really well, but I took those 3 out in favor of a more artifact heavy build. But Eternal Witness still holds its place as just an all-star to be able to get back any card that you need. Inventor's Fair works as a land or as a tutor, and the late game is nice too. Being able to get any of the valuable artifacts that I've shown throughout the deck tech is just really good with this. Teleria West is another tutor land that you can get any of your lands, you can get any of the Moxes that are in the deck, which if you really need the last pieces of like colored mana to be able to go off, it gets any of your like really good lands that I'll show you in a second. It's just a great card. So Soldevi Excavations is another new inclusion in this deck that it works as like the Keru lands, where you have to sacrifice an untapped island when it comes into play, but it doesn't come into play tapped, which is nice, and it taps for 1 and a blue. But the useful effect is to pay 1 and look at the top card of your library, and you can put that card on the bottom. So you essentially get a scry on a land, which is really good. I haven't seen too many people use this card, and it's just really abusable with Rashmi being able to ship away cards that you don't need if you have so many lands. Academy Ruins is probably one of the strongest cards in this deck. Being able to resiliently just battle through whatever your opponent has and get back any artifact that you need to get back is so good. It's like, oh, they dealt with your Basalt Monolith, put it back on the top of your deck, or just recurring Tangle Wire or Oblivion Stone. There's just a lot of good uses of Academy Ruins in this deck. Reliquary Tower, same thing as Thought Vessel, great for just maintaining the size of your hand. Ancient Tomb, I love this card in this deck. It lets you cast Rashmi earlier because it's just the 2 mana requirement, the 2 colorless mana. It's just really strong. Technical difficulties. So we have the Strip Mine that I include just to deal with problem lands that I normally can't interact with. It's good just to have that option in there. Dryad Arbor is included in the deck just as an option against sack outlets or forced sacks. Having a fetch land up and being able to fetch Dryad Arbor is just a really good option. It keeps Rashmi alive. It keeps any of your creatures to be able to block, and it's a nice little inclusion. And then to round it out, I have some fetch lands. I don't have Verdant Catacombs. It's just I've still been struggling to find that one. I have this guy. I have had a real tropical island in the past, but sold it as I run the store. So I just have my proxy. It still works well. It's just we play in store. If I ever go for an event, I'd replace it. And then just I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 islands and 3 forests to finish off the deck, just as a good way of you should always have some basics in a deck. It's always good to cover your bases against Path to Exile, Ghost Quarter. There's a lot of just random effects that benefit you having basic lands. It's always good to not have a greedy mana base play against Blood Moon. So yeah, that's my Rashmi deck tech. I hope all you enjoyed, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.